Edwina Currie is a writer, broadcaster and former politician serving as the Conservative MP for South Derbyshire from 1983 to 1997 and a junior health minister for 2 years in the 80s. And she's with us here just now. How are you today?
I'm good. It's a cold, miserable, damp day. I live in the
Yeah,
Peak District. It's often a bit like this.
yeah. But we got a great result in Eurovision on Saturday night, didn't we?
We did. I stayed up to watch it with some
Yeah.
Ukrainian friends, and I think they're still feeling a bit poorly this morning.
Yeah. Well, what first got you interested in politics in the first place?
When you have to go back more than half a century, I'm about of an age, I think, to be your grandma or great grandma.
Mm,
And I was born in Liverpool just after the Second World War,
yeah.
city that had been flattened by the bombs. When I see
Mm,
what's been happening in Ukraine, that brings back a lot of, flashbacks from childhood. I was born after the end of the war,
yeah.
but still, people were badly traumatized, and it was a grim place to be in many ways.
Mm,
And as I'm growing up, I'm thinking, right, do I want to stay here, or am I more ambitious than that?
mm,
And how do I do that? And in a way, what you're looking at, even as a teenager, is you're aware that governments and government decisions, benevolent or malevolent, affect the lives of ordinary people.
yeah.
And if you want your life to be better and those near you and around you, then maybe you should find out how the system works.
Yeah.
Which I did in particular once I was at university, and I was able to do politics and economics and so on. And actually, I can remember in 1968 when the Russians invaded Czechoslovakia,
Mm,
very similar sorts of circumstances
yeah.
during the summer holidays, during the August of 1968. When we got back there to college in the September, October, I was saying, oh, if that was me, I'd have been greeting them with an anti-tank weapon or something.
Mm,
And somebody said, no. You should be the kind of person to make sure the anti-tank weapons are there.
yeah.
You should be in politics. And that's where the idea was born. All right, maybe I might be good at this.
Yeah.
It was a weird thing to want in those days,
Mm,
Toby, because there were virtually no women in the House of Commons.
mm,
And even when I got there in 1983, I was one of only 23.
wow.
But, change was in the air because one of the
Yeah.
23 was prime minister.
Yeah. That's true.
So, we felt that anything was possible by then.
Yeah. And was that perhaps the first big political issue that got you interested, or was there maybe one closer to home first of all?
Well, there were more serious and darker things. My family are
Mm,
Orthodox Jewish, and, relatives and people that we knew and relatives of people we knew had perished in the Holocaust.
mm,
It wasn't talked about much then. But I think there was also a consciousness that the Hitler regime had been elected.
yeah.
They were actually elected in a
Mm,
democratic society in 1932. And it follows that actually politics isn't always just about being nice. You've also got to be canny. You've got to figure out how to do things.
yeah.
He was elected on a minority vote because the people who didn't get elected fell out with each other.
Mm,
The politics of this country looks a lot simpler. First past the post is something I strongly support. It has the effect of making you resolve your difficulties
mm,
before you go for election. So
yeah.
you have a lot of argument and debate behind the scenes, sometimes in public, which is what's
Yeah.
happening now.
Yeah.
But it obliges people whose basic principles are similar, but whose ideas of how to actually achieve something may be different, to sit down and argue it through. In other words, to find a compromise or to figure out a timetable. That's actually very good indeed for the way that a country may be run most of
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah. And before becoming an MP, you were a councillor for many years, right?
I was. Well, life took me and my husband, gosh, a very long time ago, in the
Yeah.
early 1970s, to the city of Birmingham. We had been working for Arthur Anderson in London, and realised that if I wanted to get to Parliament, in London there were relatively few constituencies and lots, hundreds, thousands of good candidates after them. Once you got away from there and you went into the provinces, then the situation was reversed, that there were lots of good constituencies, but on the whole, people were not putting themselves forward, or they wanted to stay local. They didn't want to go to Westminster. So I said to Ray, why don't we see if Arthur Anderson could send us to one of their new offices that they were building in different places. And I thought it might be somewhere like Bristol or Nottingham. And he came back and he said, we're going to Birmingham. Birmingham? Oh my God, another industrial city. I come from Liverpool. I don't want to go to Birmingham. And he said rather forlornly, well, I've said yes now. We'd only been married a year. So off we went to Brum, and it turned out to be superb. A great city with a strong tradition of local government, a big place, 1 million people, unitary authority responsible for all its own services, and with the resources and the determination to do things well. And in no time at all, with baby number one tucked under one arm, I'm on the council. I looked around and I thought, God, what's going to fit with kids? And the answer is social services. Bring me the childminder register. And it was years out of date. I'm going to do something about it. Yes, Councillor Mrs. Currie. So you begin to discover how to get things done. And it's an invaluable lesson in the political world. It's not just about posturing and virtue signalling. That if you have a particular interest, you pursue it, you find out more about it, you figure out how the systems work, who's responsible. Childminding, case in point. I was a young mother with a baby. In those days, nurseries didn't take children under 3. If you wanted your child looked after, it was a private arrangement. There was a rudimentary register for listing people. No DBS checks or anything like that, but it was rudimentary. It hadn't been updated for years. So we got an officer on it. They started to do visits to the people who wanted to do it. It helped young mothers who wanted to earn a bit of pin money, check the safety of the house, that kind of thing. And then when I got into a position of more responsibility, I said, look, they're a wonderful resource. They are carers who want to care, and they're not costing us anything. Let's do some training. Let's get them together. So once a week, that's what we started to do. We train them to look for things like malnutrition in the children or symptoms of child abuse, that kind of thing. And it's something that you could extend to carers of old people. We started doing a night watch system in which we would pay staff to go and sit with somebody who was old or sick, or perhaps a disabled person during the night. Didn't cost very much, but again, you're looking for signs of failure that you can help, but you're also giving support and advice. You're creating networks that didn't exist before, all quite low key. But you think to yourself, hey, this is all right. You don't need an army of people to do it. You need the will and a bit of imagination. And I was on Birmingham City Council in all for, let me think, I was on for 11 years.
Wow.
But once I got elected to Parliament, all I could do was just sort of turn up and wave. There's a story actually connected with that, and it goes back into British political history. Because once I got elected to Parliament, I said to the Conservative leader of the council, who modelled himself somewhat on Churchill, and I said, can I resign? And he said, no, you will cause a by-election. And I said, like, well, so what, basically? And he said, no, we would lose it. And I said, right, okay, but, it's not right for me not to be able to attend. He said, I said, what do the Labour Party think about all this? And he said, Labour Party wish you to stay as well. I said, really? Why? And he said, because we would lose it to the SDP, and they don't want that either. Oh, blimey. So I had to stay for 3 solid years, arrive about once every 5 or 6 months, go to a council meeting, sign in, wave, say hello to the Labour leader of the council by then, and skedaddle back to Westminster.
Wow. Yeah.
Oh dear. And they saw off the SDP. I don't think they ever really sort of reared their ugly heads in Birmingham.
No. And you were, of course, when you were an MP, you were a junior health minister from 86 to 88. What things would you say you're the most proud of during that time?
Well, I was the most junior of junior ministers.
Mm.
And there was a lot of misogyny around, and a lot of people sort of trying to push you down, you know? Yeah. So you're given a brief that's got nothing very significant on it. And you look at the list of responsibilities. You're not responsible for running the health service. You're not responsible for negotiating wages of 1.3 million staff who work in the health service or anything important. Yeah. And it's DHSS, which means by far the biggest part of the budget is social security benefits and all the issues that come from that. Yeah. And right down at the bottom of my little list of obligations was the prevention of ill health and promotion of good health. Right, okay. I'm up for that. Do I have a budget? No, I don't have a budget. Right, you're going to have to do this yourself. Within months, I was the best known MP in the ministry now. Because we got cracking. We did anti-smoking campaigns. We did eating well. I met the supermarkets. You know, I was filmed going around Tesco's and where's the skim milk? You know, where's the low-fat options? And they were all very embarrassed. Within months, we had a whole changes and widening of all the ranges of what was available, which thrilled me because I've had a long problem with keeping my weight down. So it was entirely selfish, all this stuff, you know. And then I convened a series of seminars because we were kind of working in the dark. Yeah. And my economics and my maths told me that actually you need some evidence, right? So I convened a series of seminars with some very distinguished epidemiologists with surnames like Pito. And I said, what do people die of in this country? What do people suffer from in this country? What of these things is preventable? Well, lung cancer and smoking is an obvious one. Yeah. What is probably not preventable, but if we treat it early enough, we catch it early enough, we can save lives. And how do we do that? And I'm particularly interested in women's health because I'm a woman and nobody else has looked at it ever. And they came up with breast cancer screening and cervical cancer screening. Breast cancer screening being done nationwide in Sweden, and cervical cancer screening, which is a little trickier, Toby. I'm sure you'll understand, because nobody talked about their bits in those days. Yes. Your are much more open, which is really healthy. And cervical cancer screening was being done in Finland. So I packed them into a shower bank and off we went. We went and had a look at all of this. And when I came back, we realized that we could do this. The cost-benefit analysis was such that if we could save women's lives quite early on, their contributions to society, the taxes they would pay and so on, would more than pay for the cost of the services, provided we can get them to use them. And there are two things I'm proud of. The first is when the officials set it all out and they said to me, well, which one do you want to do? Breast cancer screening or cervical cancer screening? And the thing I'm proud of is I said, well, why can't we do both? Yeah. And we did become the first country in the world to do nationwide breast and cervical cancer screening for our women, which has saved thousands and thousands and thousands of lives. It's been refined over the years. It's got better as we've done more work. But that's one thing. The other thing was to get the money. Somebody had to go and see Margaret Thatcher. Yeah. And it was my job. You do it, Edwina. You do it. So I went in and I was fully briefed. And she hated it if you were shuffling around papers. You had to answer her straight. And I spent half an hour with her. And she was of the age that we were targeting for breast cancer screening.
Yeah.
So she understood. She got a scientific background. And fired lots of questions at me and didn't give any decisions. I came out after half an hour, sort of leaned against the door. And one of my officials said, "Are you all right, Minister?" And I said, yes, I'm fine. But now I know what an Egyptian mummy felt like as they drew its brain out through its nostrils with pincers. But she said yes.
Wow.
So that's some of the stuff. Had I stayed in office long enough, we were going to start our men's bits. I was going to have a look at testicular cancer. Yes, that would have caused quite a ruckus at the time. It's being done now.
Yeah, that certainly would be interesting. And as well, of course, there was the whole salmonella in eggs thing. How bad could that epidemic have been?
We already had an epidemic on our hands with AIDS, HIV. If you haven't seen the TV series It's a Sin, that's what it was like. I watched that series with tears streaming down my face. That's how it was. The stigma against people with AIDS, HIV, against the gay community was awful. Homophobia was regarded as not just respectable, but necessary. Just awful. So to have a government campaign that tackled the spread of an epidemic amongst that group of people, which of course was spilling over through blood transfusions into just about anybody would be at risk. That was a superb lesson in the importance of public health, the importance of governments putting their minds to it in a rational and non-discriminatory fashion. Now, when it came, it also meant that the scientific community knew that I was on top of the science and I was interested, because I'd originally gone to university to do chemistry. I got a scholarship to do natural sciences. The Public Health Laboratory Service during 1988 started to ring alarm bells saying, we're getting an awful lot of samples of people seriously ill with food poisoning, so ill that they're in hospital for 6 weeks or more on kidney dialysis. And samples are being taken and sent to us, and it's coming up with a new kind of salmonella. And it's being traced to eggs. And the problem is they don't smell off or anything like that. It's in the eggs. It's spreading. It seems to have got into the oviducts of the chickens. The chickens are not ill either, not at the age where they're laying. We have a problem. We have a public health problem. And by the time we start to get on top of it, we've got 500 reported cases a week, which is a lot. It's 30,000 cases a year. And that's tip of iceberg. There's almost certainly many thousands or hundreds of thousands more cases than that. And it was a killer. In vulnerable people, it was a killer. And so we started to see what could be done. We were not the Ministry of Food. Food was the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. And to my horror, they kept saying, there isn't a problem. Well, there is a problem. How can you say that? There isn't a problem. Oh, my God. So we put out announcements to hospitals, to care homes, anything that was within our purview, saying, don't use shell eggs. Use pasteurized egg. We found there was hardly any pasteurized egg. You had to kick everybody into making pasteurized egg, which you could now still get, and cook the egg properly and all that kind of thing. And it kind of escalated to a crescendo with hundreds and hundreds of people every week saying, why doesn't the government do something about this? You know, we are not in a position to identify the risk. And I was being told, don't say a word. What? Why not? Well, the farmers don't like it. Pardon me. You know, I have a farming constituency, but my farmers wouldn't accept any omerta like that. This is ridiculous. And so eventually I thought, look, I'm sick and tired of this. I got the breast cancer campaign underway. I got the cervical cancer was fine. We'd brought in the MMR vaccine. The HIV program was underway. I thought, I'd sod this. I could do other things for a living, you know. So I told everybody. And the eggs hit the fan. And what disgusted me was that the level of denial continued for months until there was not a public inquiry, a parliamentary inquiry, at which point everyone admitted that they'd been feeding the chickens protein to improve their laying. And chickens are herbivores. They had been feeding them, Toby, ground up dead chicken. And also fish meal, which came from ground up dead things found in inland waters. There's shells of mollusks and shrimps and stuff like that. What do we have in inland waters? Sewage.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Anyway, we sorted out the eggs. I left, but MAF continued for a number of years. All right. MAF continued to do stupid things. BSE came up as a direct result of something very similar, of feeding herbivores, cows, ground up protein from infected dead stock. And then we had foot and mouth disease twice. At which point Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister, closed down MAF. And we should have done that years before. He created DEFRA, which has had a much more positive outcome. There you go. That's a long story, but that's the answer to it.
And that's certainly a lot of achievements in 2 years as a junior health minister. Would you say that's more than the average health minister?
Yeah. But what helped was I had chaired a health authority in Birmingham. I actually served on the health authority for 7 years, and it was a big health authority. It was a big central Birmingham teaching. So we had 10 teaching hospitals, and I rubbed shoulders with professors and senior consultants, served on a lot of selection committees for their colleagues, because they always had to have somebody who was not a doctor, and got to know them all really well. And, you know, after the selection committee, we go and have lunch, and I would say to them, tell me what's going on. What's the big stuff in your department? Is there anything we can help with? I also chaired social services, and I chaired housing. I'm very good indeed at sitting there at the top telling other people what to do. So that was a good background to have.
Yeah. And of being a health minister and, you know, having your constituency as well, did you ever have to prioritise one over the other, or did you still manage to find time?
It depended a bit what was going on. The representing a constituency, particularly one like mine, where we got good communications and terrific people. We'd gone through the miners' strike in 1984, almost as soon as I was elected, to my surprise and naturally secret delight. The miners took a vote and voted to stay at work. And they were part of the foundation of the Union of Democratic Mine Workers, which surprised me a bit. But basically, we were heading in the same direction. They wanted to get a different life. That, you know, my dad was a miner, my granddad was a miner, but I'd like my son and daughter to do something different. So, in fact, that was Toyota, which happened almost immediately after I'd left office. So I went from being involved with eggs to being involved with cars. You know, to learning exercise all the time. But much of the time, as a minister, what you could do is kind of test out what you're trying to do at meetings with constituents. So, for example, we're working on cervical cancer. I go to a meeting of the Mothers Union in my patch, and I say, how do we sell this? How do we do this? What works? What doesn't work? You know, there were no such things as focus groups in those days, but that's what it became. And it was the same with as votes came up on abortion and the human embryology, that kind of thing, you'd say to people, do we want to tighten the law on abortion? Is it about right? Or do you think we should make it a little easier? They were very liberal-minded, particularly the women I was talking to. And then I'd say why? Tell me. And they'd say something like, could be my granddaughter. I wouldn't want her life ruined by one mistake. Oh, my goodness. And I would pick up that the underlying philosophy of many ordinary people in this country is quite liberal-minded. It's kind, it's tolerant. If people express a fear, it's a genuine one. There's something behind it. Let me give you a more modern example. Coming, say, to the 2010 election, when Gordon Brown is the Prime Minister, he's a decent bloke. And he is tackled by a woman who's on her way to post her postal vote for him.
Oh, yeah.
And she says, what are we going to do about immigrants? And he is quite dismissive. And he gets in the car, he's still mic'd up. Yeah. And he talks about her being a bigoted woman. Oh, wow. It's one of the reasons that he lost the election. Okay. And it's one of the reasons it's still an issue now. Right. I'm the grandchild of immigrants. Right. I know how much immigrants contribute. So I'm not fearful. But what you have to think of is what's behind that fear. And Toby, it's fine for people like me. I've got 2 university degrees. Nobody is going to come in from another country and replace me. Yeah. But so many of my constituents, or the Red Wall seat, the old Red Wall seats, they're not people with a university education. They have basic skills. And the people who have arrived in recent years have replaced them in their jobs, often at lower wages. They are a threat, a big threat. And a government that seemed to welcome unlimited migration into the country was going to be a government that eventually got voted out. That's how that worked. Yeah. That's how it worked. Now, Boris, you can think of all the good and bad words about him, but he has a nose for those sorts of issues.
Of course, as well, you mentioned the whole homophobia earlier, but you actually tabled a motion to lower the age of consent for male homosexuals. You didn't quite get it to the exact same age, but you got it lower, didn't you?
Oh, we had a very exciting time. It had the gay rights at that level, age of consent, which to me was an absolutely fundamental right. I'm a Tory. I like small government. I believe that we should have as little legislation as possible telling us what to do. I hate being told what to do. I'm not really a libertarian, but I couldn't have been a health minister if I was libertarian. But I'm sympathetic to the idea that most of the time, live your life as you wish, as long as you don't hurt other people, as long as your rights don't infringe on the rights of other people as far as possible. And who you sleep with is your business. All right? We protect children, we protect the vulnerable, but apart from that, there should be equality in the way that the law applies to personal relationships. And there wasn't. It was highly discriminatory. Not for gay women. And that's because when the law was made back in Victorian times, Queen Victoria didn't believe that women could possibly love each other and do anything naughty. Okay? And so the law never mentioned gay women, but it mentioned homosexuals as gay men. And what had happened was there was an election in 1992. I had turned down the possibility of going back into government. I did not want to be police and prison minister. Yeah. I was not going to play to my no way. And it's kind of casting around for what to do next. I went to a meeting of the Tory Campaign for Homosexual Equality, TORSH, at which they were talking about trying to reverse Section 28, the clause which ban any teaching about homosexuality in schools. And I sat there thinking, this is an old battle, and it's a trivial one. It's what it represents that matters. And what we should do is go for something much more wholehearted. We should go for the age of consent. And they looked around and said, would you help? I said, sure. And they all kind of scuttled for cover and said, would you propose the amendment? And somebody said to me, it'd be good if you did, because you're a woman and you've got 2 daughters. So nobody can point the finger at you and say, what do you get up to on the bathrooms? Well, okay, I had nothing to lose. And between you, me, and the gatepost, Toby, I thought, that'll be a little bit of payback for all the snide remarks from the gammons on the back benches, good. But I said, look, it's got to be all party. This has got to be the House of Commons at its best. It has to be a free vote. And I need the Labour Party and the Lib Dems to back it. There were hardly any Scottish snacks there. And they said, okay, who do you want from the Labour Party? So I want Neil Kinnock. And they said, he recently retired as Labour leader. And they said, he won't do it. Why won't he do it? He's a Welshman. He comes from the valleys and he's got 2 sons. I said, that's exactly why he should do it. And they said, well, you can't persuade him. So Neil and I went to a hotel. We didn't do this in the House of Commons. Everyone would have been gossiping. We went to St. Ermin's Hotel at the back of St. James's Park Station, and we ate rock cakes in a corner of the lounge. And I lectured Neil Kinnock on equality. And I said, do you believe in equality? You should do this. And bless him, he did. He did. And he was excellent. And in that debate, which was February of 94, the young Shadow Home Secretary spoke, the Labour Shadow Home Secretary, and gave a humdinger of a speech. And his name was Tony Blair. The leader of the Labour Party at that time was John Smith. And I nudged somebody, and I actually wrote in my diary, that young man would be Prime Minister someday. But the great thing about the age of consent thing was, as with anything countercultural, you have to think hard how to convince a lot of people. Research showed that people would be hostile to homosexuality unless they knew somebody. So the message went out to every gay in the country and their families. I said to them, get your mothers involved. If your mother goes and tackles the neighbours and they all go and see their MP, we'll get that MP's vote. And throughout the nation, a host of young men came out to their mothers who then said, I always knew. Why are you telling me now? Because I want you to go and see the MP and tell them to vote for Edwina's amendment. Wow. Wow. And it was the first time in 25 years, a quarter century, that such a debate had been held. The way it works is that we proposed equality first, which was 16. We nearly got there, but we got 18. And we knew then it was a matter of when, not if, equality would come. And once you start those dominoes falling, you will end up with equal marriage, equal adoption rights, a whole host of other things. It takes time, but those things did happen.
But then only a few years later, in 1997, a memorable election, of course, you lost your seat. Did that surprise you, or were you sort of expecting it?
Well, given that I'd spotted Tony Blair, and but by then, in my patch, coal mining was a historical event. It's celebrated in museums. People were working in Toyota. They were settled in really good jobs. They owned their homes. They had little businesses. They were more prosperous and more secure. And Margaret Thatcher was a distant memory. And Tony Blair absolutely swept the board. I mean, credit to him. He did it exactly in the right way. He listened to what people wanted. He made all the right speeches, didn't deliver on most of them. I mean, for example, he promised gay rights. Elected in 97, he needed a hell of a nudge to actually bring equal rights in 1999. He could have done it in the first parliament, and he didn't. So he needed a bit of a nudge. And then he got embroiled in Iraq and all that kind of rubbish. I went off and I went to work for the BBC, and I presented a weekend programme in BBC Radio 5 Live, which was fairly new. I was one of the first people. It had dawned on them when they set it all up that they were all blokes. And they needed some women. So I was one of the first women presenters.
Well, and how did broadcasting compare to being a politician? Because maybe I think you've said before that you can be a little bit freer with what you say, but then again, if you're on the BBC, do you still have to maybe censor yourself a bit?
If you're wise, whatever you do and say in public, you're thinking ahead. You're thinking what effect what I'm going to say will have. You're not thinking about it for yourself. It's not really about you. It's about the words that you're putting out, the viewpoint you're putting out. What effect is it going to have on the people who hear this? If you don't want to offend anybody, don't do it. All right. It's equivalent to Twitter, which didn't exist. If you don't want to offend people, but you want to convince them, then you need to be very good with words. And it's soundbite territory, a lot of it. It's something that you learn. And sometimes you have to learn it the hard way. I'll give you an example of something which I thought about and then defended quite vigorously. And I could see how it would upset people. When we were watching the Olympics and in 2012 and the parade and so on, the Italians came in, and we watched the Paralympics. Italians came in and they all had zoot suits and they all had the same wig and they all looked so cute. Whether they were in wheelchairs or not, they looked really fabulous. They obviously thought about how to look like Italians or our stereotype of Italians. And I tweeted that I thought they all looked absolutely fabulous, including those in wheelchairs. I got a lot of stick for that. And I was invited on breakfast TV and I said, well, actually, what I said was true and I was paying them a huge compliment and I wasn't dissing people in wheelchairs. On the contrary, they had clearly decided to collude as sports people in a big joke. And if you say, oh, you can't say anything rude about people in wheelchairs, pardon me, I didn't. So, that sometimes you think hard about, sometimes you say things slightly off the top of your head, inevitably, because you're a human being. And then when you think about it, you may wish to correct it or adjust it or explore it a bit further. Sometimes you're just content that the issue is being debated. Now, unscrupulous politicians use this all the time. Brexit debates, £350 million going to Europe that could be going to the NHS. What did the opponents of that say? They would endlessly talk about how much money was going to Brussels. It didn't matter how much money was going to Brussels. The issue was that money was going to Brussels that could be used for something else. Do you see? So it's very clever to raise the issue in a way that has opponents going, oh, you got that wrong.
Absolutely. And as well as broadcasting and politics, you've done writing as well, fiction, and of course your diaries. What made you want to release books?
I'd always written my own speeches, even back in Birmingham days. I used to write regularly. I'd put articles in the Birmingham Mail, usually trying to explain what we were up to as part of this free publicity machine, right? Never had a book for advertising or anything. And that meant that I liked writing. I always enjoyed writing. And I started keeping a diary, a private diary, in August of 1987. Once we had won that election, which was the third one in a row, which was unprecedented, I think we all realized that what Margaret Thatcher was up to was astonishing. Astonishing. She really was changing the country, changing the way that the nation was thinking about supply, about the role of the unions, a whole host of things. And she was winning with huge majorities. Okay. And there was I with a ringside seat. So I started keeping a diary. And inevitably, a diary becomes a kind of false friend. Yeah. You tell the diary things you wouldn't tell anybody else, like that person was horrible to me or whatever. You almost never put anything positive in it, because if someone's nice to you, why would you write it down? Yeah. Why would you be aggrieved about it in dead of night after a couple of glasses of wine? You write down the negatives. And it was never intended for publication. I thought at some point I would write a memoir or an appreciation of Margaret Stay from having had a ringside seat. Yeah. When I left office in 1988, I was approached by a publisher who said, you know, you've been partaking in a lot of interesting stuff in the last couple of years. Do you want to write about it? Sure. Okay. And I had access to all the ministerial papers. So I wrote a book. I've actually still got a copy of it here, called Lifelines. Yeah. It's stuffed with bits of paper cut from newspapers over the years saying Edwina was right, but there you go. So I wrote this book called Lifelines, and I'm really pleased now that I did, because it's a record of what we got up to. And it sold well, and I made some money. And they came back and said, okay, keep going, basically learn to write. And then in 92, after this election, while on the one hand, I'm in meetings talking about homosexual equality, on the other hand, I'm sitting at lunch in the Savoy with a publisher saying, you're ready to write a novel. And I said, well, what would I write about? And he said, oh, you keep us entertained with the stories of what the lads get up to when the whips think they're in the constituency and the wives think they're at Westminster. And I bristled and said, you know, some of us don't have wives, some of us have husbands. And they said, that's the novel. That's the novel. Now go away and write a couple of chapters and see how you get on. So I came back with 5 short chapters. I got 5 characters who I called A, B, C, D, and E. And I wrote a short chapter about a crisis in their lives, which would form part of a plot. And one was a gay minister who's been misbehaving in Amsterdam, comes back to find that the person that he's misbehaved in Amsterdam with is waiting to see him in the lobby of the House of Commons. That was based on Jeremy Thorpe and Norman Scott. One is a woman MP who comes home early to find her husband in bed with a neighbour. That was based on one of my women colleagues. Wow. And there were 2 or 3 other scenes like this. Yeah. And I'm writing them and I think, well, I'm rather enjoying writing about sex. This is fun. So I presented about 30,000 words in these 5 short chapters as character portrayals. And the agent's eyebrows went straight up into it. And he came back and he said, oh, right, okay. I think I can sell this. And a few weeks later, I got a phone call in the House of Commons. And the voice at the other end was Hillary, the agent, who said, are you sitting down? And I said, why? He said, because I've sold it for you. Wow. And then he told me how much, and it had noughts on it. Yeah. And my salary at the time was £22,000. I said, great. What do I have to do now? He said, you have to bloody write it. And so I did. And in fact, it just kind of came out of me. We had a gay character. We had a black guy who wanted to be a candidate got beaten up, who was also based on somebody that I knew. I put all the prejudice and all the back scenes in that I had witnessed. And I gave the leading lady a lover in the House of Commons. And and it became a #1 bestseller. Yeah. Paid for this house, I can tell you. And in fact, I'd written so much that we ended up with a second novel. I ended up doing 6 novels altogether. I was dead lucky, Toby. It was just before the internet. They had to be real books, hardbacks, 20, 25 quid each. And they sold like hotcakes. Wow. I'm very, very lucky.
And of politics, broadcasting and writing, which has been the hardest?
Oh, now that's a strange question, because each of them poses their own limitations and frustrations.
Yeah.
You can't achieve much through broadcasting. In broadcasting, you are just promoting freedom of speech and expression. It's well paid, but it is risky, and you run the risk of getting the boot if you do or say something wrong. I never did. I mean, I have stopped doing a lot of it recently because I'm just, at the age of 75, I'm too busy doing other things. But there you go. When it comes to writing, especially if you're writing fiction, you can get things off your chest. You can tell the truth in fiction, which you can't do when you're writing maybe a serious memoir or something like that. And the lawyers will get at it and take stuff out. When you're in politics, though, if you genuinely try, you can genuinely make a difference. Yeah. So that makes the frustrations worth the effort. Yeah. Worth the effort. So it's a different way of answering your question, but that's the way I would word it, that if you're looking at what's worthwhile, then serving the public as an elected official of some kind or other is really worth doing.
Yeah. Now, here we go with these probing questions. As a former health minister, how well do you think the government have done over the last 2 years with COVID?
Well, they started off badly, but then that's true of an awful lot of governments. Yeah. They caught up very, very fast. And with the funding that went to Oxford and AstraZeneca, we ended up with a world-beating vaccine. Absolutely superb, a lot cheaper than Pfizer, and just as effective, and able to go to many other countries. I think it's about 180 countries it's used in now, where Pfizer is just too expensive to use. So they did very well with that, with the vaccine development, the vaccine rollout. Test and trace was always going to be hard. Yeah. Because the people who need to work, like delivery drivers, not going to get tested, And the head of steam that built up against lockdown and mass, I deplored. The argument now is we should have been more like Sweden and let people do their own thing. But general health in Sweden is much, much better than it is here. We have so many obese people, starting with the Prime Minister, who ended up in hospital desperately ill. So I think they got their heads around it and eventually got the backing of the public within weeks. What happened with the care homes was a tragedy. It happened in many other countries as well, because nobody realized how vicious this respiratory disease was against old people, and especially those with underlying health reasons, which is why they have been in hospital in the first place. And the care sector has been woefully under-supported. It's not just underfunding, under-supported in so many ways. And those weaknesses then come home to haunt us. But more recently, I think with coming out of lockdown quickly and saying to people, look, just use your common sense. I think that's been very, very successful. There has been a wave of COVID infection, but it's not been serious. Most people have had it. I haven't, as far as I know. Vaccination rates continue to be very high. And I think we all know that if we have to, if there's a new wave, we'll just get another jab. I've got 4.
Ooh.
You know, pincushion. Yeah. I think recently they've done it pretty well. And it's now time for us all to move on from this appalling episode, dreadful tragedy affecting the world and its citizens.
Yeah. And so-called Partygate, does that issue bother you at all?
Well, they should not have been having parties in Downing Street. And the senior civil servants there who were sending out some of those invitations should not be now employed by the public purse, in my humble view. That was wrong. That was just plain wrong. And it seems to have been happening all the time. It seems to have been part of a culture of, Downing Street, we work really hard. Whitehall, we work really hard. We work long hours, and we'll make it a lovely place to work because we'll have a few drinks afterwards. Personally, I do not think there's any place for alcohol in the office. You want to party, go to the pub. Oh, the pub's shut. There's a reason the pub's shut.
Yes.
Go home. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that should have been the approach of the responsible adults who were there. The Prime Minister, I think, got caught up in it inadvertently. I don't think he was the leader of it. I think the accusations that he was the instigator, I think, are nonsense. It's clear that some of these events happened and were organised by other people, including his wife, who should have known better. But the emphasis on it from last November, I think it's been deeply unhelpful. And it will come back to bite Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner. And it always would have done. Somebody should have said to Keir, hang on a minute, before you start claiming the moral high ground, are we absolutely sure that we aren't vulnerable? Right? Because hypocrisy is a charge that can stick. Yeah. And it round where I live, where, quite a lot of people around here vote Labour, there were parties going on all over the place. Often in people's back gardens, which would do no harm, but still. So I deplore that endless poking around. And certainly once the Ukrainian war started, I think in the interest of freedom and democracy and the safety and security of Europe, the Labour Party should have abandoned it, stopped it. I don't think it will do them any good in the long term.
Yeah. And of course, Keir Starmer as well is facing his own accusations, as you touched on. What do you make of them? Do you have the same opinion, or is it maybe, as you mentioned, the hypocrisy there that maybe bothers you?
Well, I think the hypocrisy flows right through. I think it flows a lot through the Labour Party. There's a reason I choose year by year to renew my membership of the Conservative Party, because for all its faults, I think Conservative governments have benefited this country hugely, and Labour governments have not, with odd exceptions like bringing in the health service and so on. But then you're going back to when I was a baby. That's a long, long time ago. So there's an element of organised hypocrisy about Labour, and I was particularly upset and disturbed about the anti-Semitism that was allowed to flourish and was encouraged and condoned under its previous leadership, and which hasn't been completely eradicated yet. Keir Starmer often says the right things, but politics is about getting things done. And getting things done means getting rid of the candidates who were fomenting some of that, and he hasn't managed to do that yet. Even around here where I live, I won't say names, but they know who they are, kind of thing. Keir himself is not a politician, right? A politician is somebody who susses out the effect that they're having. He's a boring old fart. All right. I mean, he's not going to go down well in the pubs of Preston, not really. And his problem is that in Scotland, the SNP is still rampant. And he can't form a government without seats in Scotland. There's just, it's too big a gap.
Yeah.
So he would need to be thinking very hard how to do that. So what do I think about him? I'm rather glad he's the Labour leader.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And as well, you have competed in many shows like Strictly and I'm a Celebrity. Is that fun stuff to do?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you do these things for three reasons. Firstly, it's actually fun to do. I mean, the first one I got involved in like that was Hell's Kitchen with Gordon Ramsay. And I'm still using some of the recipes. And I hate cooking, but having learned how to do some of the restaurant tricks and how to produce really lovely food from good ingredients, I'm still keen to do all that. And I'm being sworn at by Gordon Ramsay. I looked at him and I said, I've been sworn at by better men and women than you, So you do it because it's fun.
Yeah.
They're very well paid.
Yeah.
If they're not well paid, you don't do them. I was asked not long ago to go and do the Best Marigold Hotel in India in July.
Whoa.
For peanuts. I wouldn't go to India in July for anything.
No.
But no, that's not going to happen. And the third thing is that it helps keep your profile high. Just occasionally that can be useful. That brings more work. That brings more requests to do things. And yeah, that's fine. That's why you've still heard of me. The one I'm proudest of, there's two I'm proud of. One was doing Celebrity Wife Swap with John McCurrick. That's been shown over and over and over again. Very strange man. And my husband had to look after his wife, a very strange lady. And the other one is Celebrity Mastermind.
Yeah. Well, you were the first woman to win that, weren't you?
Well, roll of drums, please.
Okay.
Because I won it twice. I won it twice.
Yeah.
At the time I won it twice, I was the only person to have won it twice. Yeah. But then somebody else won it twice. So I'm up there with the stars. And actually, there must be something in the water around here because Whaley Bridge is the home of Alice Walker, who won Mastermind quite recently. So Whaley Bridge is the home to two Masterminds.
Yeah, that's incredible. And as well, what do you like to get up to in your spare time when you're not on the telly and writing and stuff?
Well, I have two small dogs, and walking them is good for me mentally and physically. I get out into the countryside, and with dogs, you have to go out in all weathers. So it's a good thing to do. I've been out when it's snowing and raining like it was this morning. And you come back feeling refreshed. It's healthy for the heart and so on. And I have lots of family. I went down to London yesterday, which was a Sunday, to a birthday party for my 86-year-old cousin.
Wow.
My mother was one of 8 who were very close, 8 siblings, and they had 9 children between them. The youngest is 62, and the oldest is 87.
Wow.
And had a party, and that was fun to do. And other than that, I keep pretty busy. I got very much involved in all the Ukraine stuff. My grandmother came from Poltava. So if you look at my Twitter feed, you would think I was a war correspondent. That's the stuff that I retweet all the time. I'm very much involved with trying to help some refugees, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Every day is busy.
Yeah. And are there any plans for you to root back to politics?
I did try this time last year. My husband, John, died of cancer in November 2020. And then last year we had delayed local elections with the county elections. And there was a possibility of fighting the seat where I actually live.
Wow.
And so I had a crack at it. I pushed the vote up from 1,048 to 1,878.
Wow.
And that should have been enough. But it wasn't. The Labour Party brought in people from Manchester and Salford, and they fought it like a general election. The turnout was 55%, which is not bad for a local election.
Yeah.
And they won enough to win it. And after that, I said, okay, well, I tried and I failed. And that is not what, good Lord wants for me. Something else will turn up, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And as I say, with the refugees, and I find myself extremely busy.
Yes. And I could probably guess the answer to this based on something you said earlier about Labour and Keir Starmer. But do you think the Conservatives will win the next general election?
I do, actually. Boris is the great, he's been called Grease Piglet. He is the great survivor. And he is, even now, he's ramping it up a bit. You can see the fault lines being drawn, I think, for the next election. One being Brexit, still. If the other side win, if Keir Starmer and North London win, they will reverse Brexit. They will apply to rejoin the European Union. And I think they might. If you listen to Alistair Campbell, who was Blair's advisor, they would do it in like a shot. Yeah. And so the more Alistair talks like that, the more I retweet him, and the more I think that's going to be one of the issues. Secondly, immigration. We had, despite lockdown and so on, we had 600,000 new people arrive last year. Not from the EU so much as from the Indian subcontinent. And they've come because we need them. I don't think they've come for free healthcare and benefits. But nonetheless, as I said earlier, they help me. They don't challenge me in my work and my job. And I think immigration is going to continue to be an issue. And the red-blue wall seats in the north of England, getting the money to them and upgrading facilities and so on. Where I live, for example, there's over 100 million being spent on the rail services in the Glossop area, going out through to Hope Valley. There's new bypasses being built. There's a new hospital being built in the middle of Buxton, which has been talked about for donkey's years, never actually happened. We actually see cranes, I don't mean the birds, on the horizon. And, the opportunities are tremendous. The Northeast is going to be one of the most successful areas for renewable energy in the world. Yeah. And those seats are going to be Tory for decades to come. So, yes, and we may lose a few down south to Lib Dems. But in the most recent elections, in England, Labour Party won, I think, about 4 seats. So I don't think Labour's going to make much progress in England. It doesn't look like they're going to make much progress in Scotland. There isn't much progress for them to make in Wales, and they don't have any seats in Northern Ireland. Mind you, neither do I. Neither do we. So it'll be... This is politics, fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, where can we keep up to date with you everywhere?
You can follow me on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's Edwina_Currie, Currie. They haven't given me a blue flag. I have no idea why. I've got about 24,000 followers, I think. Yeah. I can't be bothered with bureaucracy. If they don't want to give me a blue flag, fine. You can usually figure out it's me. And I have a website, edwinacurrie.co.uk. And on LinkedIn, if you are interested in LinkedIn, if you've got business people. I do all sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, just as we go, is there a particular song that we can play for you?
If you've got it, the Beatles' Penny Lane is lovely.
Okay.
Now, why Penny Lane? Because that's where I grew up. There really was a barber. There really was a nurse. She wasn't selling poppies on a tray. She was selling Alexandra roses for the nursing profession. Paul McCartney lived in one place. John Lennon lived another. And I lived up the road. And we all went to 3 of us went to the Liverpool Institute. I went to the girls' school. They went to the boys' school. And I used to go to the cavern when school thought I was going to my dad's for a sandwich. And Dad thought I was staying in school. I was in the cavern. Yeah.
Just like the husbands and wives in Westminster. We'll stick that on for you, and many thanks for joining us on the show. It's been great to have you here.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very, very much, and toodaloo.